I went on a boat trip with my husband, then I blacked out. When I woke up, I was alone on a wild island. I saw my husband on the boat, leaving me behind. He waved and yelled, "Goodbye, loser. You'll never see me again." I survived by myself for a year. Then one day, I saw a ship. In that moment, I already knew the revenge I'd planned would be both devastating and sweet. It turned out that the champagne tasted bitter that night, a metallic tang on my tongue that, looking back, was a chilling foreshadowing. It was our anniversary cruise, a scene set for romance and Caribbean sunsets, but it quickly became the backdrop for the most profound betrayal of my life. I should have noticed something was off, the way Grant kept pressing me to drink more, but I was so wrapped up in the magic of it all. The gentle rocking of the rented yacht, the promise of a week away from everything. My head grew heavy, the world tilted, not from the waves, but from something insidious taking hold. I remember reaching for the railing, my fingers slipping, and Grant's face swam into view, his expression unreadable. Then, nothing. I woke up to sand in my mouth and the screeching of gulls. My head pounding like a sledgehammer had found a new rhythm inside my skull. Blinking against the harsh, unfamiliar sunlight, I pushed myself up on shaky arms. Palm trees swayed above me, dense jungle stretched behind me, and the beach curved away into rocky outcrops. That's when I heard it, the distant thrum of an engine. Stumbling to my feet, I turned, and there it was, our yacht, maybe 200 yards offshore, moving steadily away. And on its deck, Grant, my husband of 3 years, stood waving. His voice carried across the water, clear and chillingly mocking, "Goodbye, loser. You'll never see me again." I screamed his name until my throat was raw, ran into the surf until the water reached my waist, my dress tangling around my legs. But the yacht kept going, shrinking into a white speck on the horizon, until it was just gone. The first night was an abyss. I had nothing, no supplies, no shelter, no fresh water. I curled up under a cluster of palms, shivering despite the tropical heat, my mind a chaotic mess. Grant had drugged me. Grant had abandoned me on this godforsaken island. Grant had planned this. Why? The question circled relentlessly, a predator in my thoughts. We'd had problems, sure, what marriage doesn't, but nothing that warranted this. Nothing that explained the cold calculation I'd seen in his eyes as he waved goodbye. The next morning, I forced myself to explore. The island was tiny, maybe 2 miles across at its widest. Rocky cliffs to the west, impenetrable jungle inland. But I found a freshwater stream, cutting through the center like a lifeline. Small mercies, I thought. I wouldn't die of dehydration at least. By day 3, I'd fashioned a crude shelter from palm fronds and driftwood. My expensive designer sundress was already torn and stained beyond recognition. I'd figured out how to crack coconuts against rocks, a desperate victory. I also realized he'd taken everything. My phone, my wallet, everything but the clothes on my back and the wedding ring still on my finger. On day 4, I ripped it off and hurled it into the ocean, a small act of defiance. The weeks blurred into an endless cycle of survival. I learned to spear fish with a sharpened branch, which berries were safe to eat, how to make fire with friction, a painful, blister-inducing process. But the hardest lesson was the one about loneliness, how it could be its own slow death. At night, in my flimsy shelter, I'd think about Grant. Not the charming financial analyst I thought I'd married. The one who'd swept me off my feet at that art gallery opening. No, I thought about the real Grant, the one I'd apparently never known. Slowly, painfully, I pieced together the clues I'd missed. The way he'd insisted I quit my marketing director job after we married, claiming he wanted more time together, but really, he wanted me dependent. The way he'd subtly isolated me from my friends, always an excuse for why we couldn't attend gatherings. The way he'd taken over our finances, putting everything solely in his name. And then, the ultimate punch to the gut. The $2 million life insurance policy he'd taken out on me 6 months earlier. At the time, I'd called it responsible planning. Now, I understood. It was a down payment on my murder. Because that's what this was. He'd left me here to die, counting on the island's remoteness and the vastness of the ocean to ensure I'd never be found. He'd go home, wait a respectable amount of time, report me missing, play the devastated husband. Then, he'd collect the money and move on with his life. The rage, a cold, burning ember, kept me alive during those first months. I survived out of pure, unadulterated spite, determined not to give him the satisfaction of my death. Around the 3-month mark, though, I realized spite wasn't enough. Not if I wanted to truly last. I needed a plan. So, I started thinking like Grant would think, calculating, methodical, always 3 steps ahead. First, I needed to stay alive long enough to be rescued. That meant securing better food sources, improving my shelter. I wove stronger walls from palm fronds and vines, dug channels to collect rainwater, created a smoking rack to preserve fish. I mapped every inch of that island, memorizing its resources and dangers. Second, I needed to prepare for the day I got off this island. That meant staying physically strong. I developed a brutal routine of exercises, swimming in the lagoon, climbing the rocky cliffs, running along the beach. My body transformed from soft and pampered to lean, hard muscle. My hands, once manicured, became calloused and capable. And third, I needed to plan my revenge. This is what filled the long, empty hours. How to destroy Grant as completely as he'd tried to destroy me. I couldn't just have him arrested for attempted murder. He'd covered his tracks too well. We'd rented the yacht privately, paid in cash, told no one where we were going. He'd probably report me as having fallen overboard accidentally, maybe even manufactured some evidence, a dropped shoe, a smear of blood on the deck. No, I needed something more devastating. I needed to tear apart his entire life, piece by piece, just as he'd torn apart mine. The answer came to me during my 6th month. I was sitting on the beach, watching the sunset, when I remembered something: Grant's business partner, Trevor Winters. Trevor had been at our wedding, gotten drunk, and cornered me by the cake, complaining about how Grant was cutting him out of deals, hiding revenue from their joint ventures. At the time, I'd brushed it off as wedding drama. But what if there was more to it? What if Grant's business dealings weren't as clean as he claimed? I started going through every conversation, every document I'd ever seen in Grant's home office. My memory had always been sharp, something Grant both admired and resented about me. I reconstructed figures, dates, names. I remembered file folders labeled with cryptic account numbers, phone calls Grant had taken in hushed tones, convinced I couldn't hear him from the next room. Slowly, a horrifying picture emerged. Grant wasn't just a financial analyst. He was running some kind of elaborate investment scam, taking money from clients and funneling it through offshore accounts. Trevor had been a part of it initially but was being pushed out. That's why Grant needed the insurance money. He was either running from the law or running from people he'd stolen from. Maybe both. This was it. This was my leverage. This was how I would destroy him. But first, I needed to survive long enough to use it. The 7th month brought a violent storm that nearly killed me. Wind tore apart my shelter like tissue paper. Waves surged halfway up the beach. I huddled in a cave I'd discovered in the rocky cliffs, listening to the howling wind, wondering if this was how it would end. When it passed, half my supplies were gone. I had to start over, building a stronger shelter further inland, creating better storage for food and water. It set me back weeks. The 8th month brought fever. Something I ate, or something that bit me, I never knew which. I spent days shaking and delirious, barely able to drag myself to the stream for water. I came close to dying then, closer than I like to think about. But spite, as it turns out, is a powerful medicine. I survived. By the 9th month, I'd achieved something like equilibrium with the island. I knew its rhythms, its moods, its dangers. I could predict storms by watching the birds, find food even during scarce periods. I'd created a signal fire, ready to light quickly if I ever saw a ship, though none had appeared. I also started talking to myself, which probably wasn't a good sign. But the silence was crushing, and hearing a human voice, even my own, helped keep me sane. I'd narrate my daily tasks, discuss my revenge plans with imaginary audiences, even argue with phantom versions of Grant. You thought I was weak, I'd snarl, sharpening my fishing spear. You thought I'd curl up and die out here. The 10th month brought a moment of despair so profound, I almost walked into the ocean and kept going. It was our anniversary, not the fake one Grant had chosen for the cruise, but our real wedding anniversary. I'd been on this island almost as long as we'd been married. Everything I'd built with him had been a lie, and now I was alone on this godforsaken rock with nothing but coconuts, fish, and my own tortured thoughts. But I didn't walk into the ocean. Instead, I climbed to the highest point on the island and screamed until my voice gave out. Then I climbed back down and kept surviving. The 11th month brought an unexpected gift. I found a sealed plastic container washed up on the beach, the kind used for emergency supplies. Inside was a working flare gun with 3 flares, a waterproof blanket, and a first aid kit. It had probably fallen off some cargo ship, but to me, it was a miracle. I guarded those flares like they were made of gold. I wouldn't waste them unless I was absolutely certain a ship was close enough to see. By the end of the 11th month, I barely recognized myself. My hair was long and tangled, bleached by the sun. My skin was dark and weathered. My body was pure muscle and sinew. I'd lost probably 45 pounds. The person staring back at me from the stream surface looked feral, wild, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. All those hours of solitude had honed my thoughts to a razor's edge. I planned every detail of my revenge, playing it out 1,000 times, anticipating every variable. During those final weeks before my rescue, I spent hours each day going through mental exercises, keeping my mind sharp. I'd recite everything I knew about Grant's business dealings, testing my memory against itself. The account numbers had to be perfect. The dates had to be exact. One mistake could undermine everything. I remembered the night I'd accidentally walked in on Grant's video call with someone whose face he'd quickly blocked from the camera. He'd been furious, more furious than I'd ever seen him. He'd accused me of spying, of trying to interfere with his work. I'd apologized profusely, convinced I'd done something terrible. Now I understood. He'd been afraid I'd seen or heard something incriminating. That video call had been on March 15th, 2 years ago. The person on the other end had said something about the Singapore transfer before Grant muted them. Singapore. I turned that word over in my mind like a stone. What did Grant have in Singapore? I remembered another incident, this one from our honeymoon. We'd been in Bali, and Grant had spent an entire afternoon locked in our hotel room on his laptop while I waited by the pool. When he finally emerged, he'd been relaxed, almost giddy. He'd ordered expensive champagne, and told me we could afford anything I wanted now. A big deal just closed, he'd said. Our honeymoon had been in June, 18 months ago. What deal closes during someone's honeymoon? What kind of person prioritizes work over their new spouse? Unless that work is something they can't trust anyone else to handle. These memories formed a web, each strand connecting to others. I could see the pattern now, clear as day. Grant had been building his scheme for years, probably long before he'd even met me. Marrying me had been part of the plan, too. A way to look stable and trustworthy to potential investors. The devoted husband with a pretty wife made for good optics when you're convincing people to hand over their life savings. I thought about the dinner parties we'd hosted. Grant had always invited the same types of people, older couples, recently retired, sitting on substantial nest eggs. He charmed them with talk of market trends and investment opportunities. I'd play the perfect hostess, serving canapés and making small talk, while Grant planted seeds that would later bloom into fraudulent investment schemes. I'd been a prop in his con. The realization made me want to scream, but instead, I channeled that rage into my survival and my planning. Every fish I caught, every fire I built, every sunrise I witnessed was a victory over Grant's intentions. He'd meant for me to die here, terrified and alone. Instead, I was thriving in ways he'd never anticipated. The island had taught me things I'd never have learned in my old life. I understood now how little I'd actually needed, how much of my previous existence had been artificial padding around an empty core. The designer clothes, the expensive dinners, the carefully curated social media presence, all of it had been a costume I wore to play the role Grant had assigned me. Out here, stripped of everything, I'd found something real. Strength I didn't know I possessed. Resilience that surprised even me. A kind of clarity that only comes when you're reduced to pure survival. I'd also discovered I was smarter than Grant had ever given me credit for. He dismissed my intelligence, called my career cute, suggested my contributions were less valuable than his. He'd made me feel small and dependent. But my mind was the thing that would ultimately destroy him, because I'd figured out something else during my months of isolation. Grant wasn't just running a Ponzi scheme or a simple embezzlement operation. He was laundering money for someone else. That Singapore connection, the hushed phone calls, the offshore accounts in multiple countries, it all pointed to something bigger than a lone financial analyst stealing from his clients. Grant was a middleman. And if I could prove that, if I could provide authorities with evidence of the larger operation, I wouldn't just be bringing down my attempted murderer. I'd be dismantling an entire criminal network. The thought filled me with a fierce sense of purpose. My survival wasn't just about personal revenge anymore. Other people were victims of whatever Grant was involved in. Other families had lost their savings, their futures, their security. By exposing Grant, I'd be helping them too. I started composing my testimony in my head, practicing how I'd explain everything to investigators. I'd need to be credible, coherent, detailed. I couldn't come across as a traumatized victim making wild accusations. I needed to be precise, professional, unshakable. So, I rehearsed. Standing on the beach, I'd deliver my testimony to imaginary FBI agents. I'd answer their hypothetical questions, anticipate their skepticism, provide additional details to corroborate my claims. I must have looked insane, gesturing at the empty air, conducting full conversations with people who weren't there. But the practice kept my mind engaged and prepared me for what was coming. I also thought a lot about what I'd do after Grant was behind bars. My old life was gone. I understood that. I couldn't go back to being the person I was before the island. That version of me had died the moment I woke up on that beach. But who would I become instead? The question fascinated me. I had a chance to rebuild myself from scratch, to choose who I wanted to be rather than accepting what others expected of me. Maybe I'd go back to school, study something I'd always been interested in but never pursued. Marine biology, perhaps. I'd certainly learned enough about ocean life to spark a genuine interest. Or environmental science or psychology. I'd spent enough time analyzing my own trauma to be curious about the human mind. Maybe I'd write a book about my experience, not for money or fame, but to process what had happened, to turn my nightmare into something that might help someone else survive their own impossible situation. Or maybe I'd disappear entirely, start over somewhere new with a different name and a different life. The thought had appeal, becoming someone Grant could never find, never touch, never influence, even from prison. These daydreams kept me company during my final weeks on the island. They gave me something to look forward to beyond simply revenge. Because revenge, I was learning, was cold comfort. It wouldn't heal me. It wouldn't undo the trauma. It would simply balance the scales. Real healing would come from building something new, from taking the lessons the island had taught me and applying them to whatever came next. I'd learned that I could survive anything. That I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. That I didn't need Grant or anyone else to validate my worth. These lessons were the island's true gifts, more valuable than any revenge could ever be. Still, I wanted the revenge. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. I wanted Grant to feel a fraction of the fear and desperation I'd felt. I wanted him to understand that you can't just erase people when they become inconvenient. I wanted him to face consequences for once in his privileged, consequence-free life. The wanting didn't make me a bad person, I decided. It made me human. And after almost a year of being reduced to pure survival instinct, reclaiming my humanity, even the darker parts of it, felt like an achievement. Then, on day 362 of my exile, I saw the ship. It was mid-morning. I was checking my fishing traps in the lagoon when I noticed something on the horizon. At first, I thought it was a cloud formation, but clouds don't have straight edges. Clouds don't move with such purpose. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum in my chest. I scrambled out of the water and ran for my shelter, where I'd stored the flare gun. My hands shook as I loaded the first flare. I climbed to my signal fire spot, a clearing on a hill with a good view of the ocean, and waited. The ship was getting closer, but it wasn't heading directly toward the island. It was going to pass maybe 2 miles offshore. I lit my signal fire, which I kept prepared for exactly this moment. Black smoke billowed into the clear sky. Then I fired the flare. The bright red projectile arced into the sky, leaving a trail of smoke. I loaded the second flare, waited, fired again. The ship was still coming, but had it seen me? I loaded my last flare. My hands were steadier now. I tracked the ship's movement, calculated the angle and fired. This time I saw the ship alter course. It was turning toward the island. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by a cascade of emotions I couldn't quite name. Relief, yes. Joy, maybe. But underneath it all was something colder, harder. Anticipation. Grant thought I was dead. Grant thought he'd gotten away with it. The revenge I had planned would be both devastating and sweet. The ship, a commercial fishing vessel called the Pacific Promise, reached the island 2 hours later. They couldn't get too close because of the shallow waters and rocky outcrops, so they sent a small motorboat to shore. 3 men approached me cautiously. I must have looked like a madwoman, standing on the beach in my tattered dress, hair wild, skin burned dark by the sun. "Miss," one of them called, "are you all right?" I opened my mouth and realized I hadn't spoken to another human being in almost a year. My voice came out as a raw croak. "I need help." They wrapped me in blankets, gave me water, asked gentle questions. I told them my name and that I'd been stranded after a boating accident. I didn't mention Grant yet. That conversation would come later, and not with them. On the ship, the captain, a weathered man named Rodriguez, gave me his cabin and radioed the Coast Guard. He offered me food, but my stomach had shrunk so much I could only eat a few bites. He offered me clothes, and I gratefully changed out of the rags I'd been wearing for a year. "You're lucky to be alive," Captain Rodriguez said. "That island isn't on any major shipping routes. We only came this way because we were following a tuna school." Lucky, I repeated. The word felt strange in my mouth. The Coast Guard helicopter arrived 6 hours later. They airlifted me to a hospital in Puerto Rico, where doctors examined me with a mixture of professional concern and undisguised curiosity. Dehydration, malnutrition, various infections, sun damage, but overall remarkably healthy given the circumstances. "You're incredibly resilient," the attending physician told me. "Most people wouldn't have survived a month in those conditions." "I had a reason to survive," I said. They contacted my emergency contact, my sister Bethany, who nearly fainted when she heard my voice on the phone. She'd been told I was dead. There had been a funeral and everything, she sobbed. "Grant said you fell overboard. He said they searched for days, but couldn't find you." "Oh my God, I can't believe you're alive. Is Grant still in Boston?" I asked. "Yes, wait. You want to see him after everything you've been through? I have some questions for him." The news of my rescue made headlines. "Woman survives year on deserted island," screamed the papers. Reporters tried to get interviews. The hospital had to post security to keep them away. Everyone wanted to know how I'd survived, what I'd eaten, how I'd maintained my sanity. No one was asking the right questions yet, but they would. I was discharged after 3 days with strict instructions to take it easy and attend follow-up appointments. Bethany flew down to Puerto Rico to bring me home. On the plane, she filled me in on everything that had happened since my disappearance. Grant had reported me missing the day after the cruise. He'd said we'd been drinking, celebrating our anniversary, and when he woke up in the morning, I was gone. He'd called the Coast Guard immediately. There had been a massive search operation that lasted 2 weeks before they called it off. My body was never found, but with the currents in that area and the time that had passed, authorities concluded I'd drowned. Grant had played the grieving husband perfectly. He'd cried at my funeral. He'd given a moving eulogy about our love and all the plans we'd had together. He'd moved out of our house because it was too painful to be there without me. He'd even started a small scholarship fund in my name. Everyone felt so terrible for him, Bethany said. He seemed absolutely destroyed. "I bet he did," I murmured. What Grant hadn't counted on was me coming back from the dead. We landed in Boston late in the evening. Bethany wanted to take me to her house, let me rest, ease back into civilization. But I had other plans. "Take me to Grant," I said. "Are you sure? Maybe you should wait until, take me to Grant." She drove me to his new apartment in the Seaport district. Expensive area. He must have already cashed in some of that life insurance money. The thought made my blood boil. I told Bethany to wait in the car. This confrontation would be private. The doorman tried to stop me. I still looked pretty rough despite my new clothes and cleaned-up appearance. But I told him my name and watched his face go pale. He stammered something about calling Mr. Ashford, but I was already heading for the elevator. Grant lived on the 15th floor. I knocked on his door, my heart hammering in my chest. This was the moment I'd fantasized about for a year. The moment I'd see his face when he realized his plan had failed. The door opened. Grant stood there in expensive loungewear, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking tanned and relaxed. He saw me, and the glass fell from his hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. "Hello, Grant," I said. "Miss me?" His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, fear, and finally, a desperate attempt at joy. "Oh my God, you're alive. I can't believe. How did you? Where have you been?" He reached for me, and I stepped back. "Don't, sweetheart. I've been going crazy with worry. The Coast Guard said you probably drowned, but I never gave up hope." "Stop lying," I said quietly. "I know what you did." His face changed again, the mask slipping. For just a moment, I saw the real Grant. Cold, calculating, murderous. Then he recovered, forcing confusion onto his features. "What are you talking about? You fell overboard. I looked for you. You drugged me. You dumped me on that island. You left me there to die so you could collect my life insurance. That's insane. You must have hit your head." The trauma, I remember everything, Grant. The champagne tasting bitter. Your face right before I passed out. And when I woke up on that beach, I saw you. I saw you on the yacht, waving goodbye, telling me I'd never see you again. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he laughed, and there was nothing warm in the sound. "You can't prove any of that. It's your word against mine, and you've been alone on an island for a year. Who's going to believe you're in your right mind?" "Maybe you're right," I conceded. "Maybe I can't prove attempted murder." He relaxed slightly, taking that as a victory. "But I can prove fraud," I continued. "I can prove embezzlement. I can prove that you've been running an investment scam for the last 5 years, stealing millions from your clients. I can prove that Trevor Winters is evidence of all of it. That he's been collecting documentation, because you were cutting him out." Grant's face went white. "How could you possibly? I had a lot of time to think on that island. A lot of time to remember things. I always had an excellent memory, you used to say it yourself. Account numbers, client names, conversations. I overheard the Cayman account ending in 4721. The Luxembourg account ending in 9382. The Shell Corporation in Delaware called Harbinger Investments. The falsified statements you sent to the Morrison family, the Chin family, the Rodriguez family. Should I go on?" He stared at me, and I could see him calculating, trying to figure out if I really knew what I claimed to know. I did. Every number, every name, every detail I'd painstakingly reconstructed during my months of solitude. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice hollow. "I want you to know what it feels like to lose everything," I said. "Tomorrow morning, I'm going to the police. I'm going to the FBI. I'm going to the families you stole from. And I'm going to Trevor Winters, who I suspect will be very interested in making a deal to testify against you. They'll arrest you too. You were my wife. They'll think you were part of it," he spluttered. "I was never part of your business dealings. You kept me isolated, remember? You made sure I had no access to your accounts, no knowledge of your work. You made me quit my job. You controlled every aspect of my life. It was another way to control me. But now, it's going to save me. And destroy you." Grant lunged forward, grabbing my arm. For a moment, I saw real violence in his eyes. He was considering killing me right here, right now, consequences be damned. But I'd spent a year learning to survive. My body moved on instinct, twisting his arm and using his momentum to throw him off balance. He stumbled backward, crashing into a side table. "Don't touch me," I said, my voice deadly calm. "I'm not the woman you left on that island. That woman was weak, dependent, controllable. I'm someone else now." I turned and walked toward the door. "You'll never make this stick," he shouted after me. "I'll fight you on everything. I'll make your life hell." I looked back at him. This man I'd once loved. This man who tried to murder me. "You already did," I said. "But I survived. Can you say the same?" Over the next few weeks, I watched Grant's life collapse with methodical satisfaction. The FBI opened an investigation based on my testimony and the detailed information I provided. Trevor Winters, facing his own charges, did exactly what I predicted and cut a deal, turning over mountains of evidence against Grant. The life insurance company, thrilled not to have to pay out $2 million to a potential murderer, hired a team of investigators to prove Grant had attempted to murder me. They found the private yacht owner who remembered Grant acting nervous and insisting on specific departure times. They found Grant's search history on his work computer showing he'd researched remote islands and survival rates for castaways. They found receipts for sleeping pills purchased under a fake name at a pharmacy 2 towns over from where we lived, bought a week before our trip. The attempted murder charge stuck. Grant's assets were frozen. His clients sued him. His reputation was demolished. The news coverage was relentless. The man who tried to kill his wife and steal millions, undone by her miraculous survival. I learned from the prosecutors that Grant had been living off credit and borrowed money from associates while waiting for the insurance payout. The death certificate process was still ongoing when I returned. He'd planned to have me declared legally dead through a maritime court, which could happen much faster than the typical 7-year waiting period for missing persons. My resurrection had stopped that process cold, leaving him deeply in debt to some very dangerous people. As for me, I moved in with Bethany while I figured out my next steps. The world I'd left behind felt alien. Now, supermarkets overwhelmed me with their abundance. Sleeping in a soft bed felt strange after a year on the ground. I jumped at sudden noises. I hoarded food, even though I knew I didn't need to. But I was alive and I was free, and Grant was going to prison for a very long time. Was it worth it? Bethany asked me one evening. The revenge, I mean. Does it make up for what happened? I thought about that question. Nothing could give me back the year I'd lost. Nothing could erase the trauma of nearly dying alone on that island. Nothing could restore my innocence or my ability to trust. But watching Grant lose everything he valued, his freedom, his wealth, his reputation, did provide a certain cold satisfaction. It doesn't make up for it, I said. But it helps. The trial was scheduled for 6 months away. I'd have to testify, relive everything in front of cameras and journalists, and Grant himself. I wasn't looking forward to it, but I'd do it. I'd survived worse. In the meantime, I started therapy, started rebuilding my life, started figuring out who I was now that I was no longer Grant's wife or the woman on the island. It wasn't easy. Some days I felt barely human, like I'd left too much of myself on that beach. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Kim, specialized in trauma survivors. She had kind eyes and never pushed me to talk before I was ready. During our 3rd session, she asked me something no one else had. Do you feel guilty for surviving? The question caught me off guard. Why would I feel guilty? Many trauma survivors do, she explained. You endured something that should have killed you. Part of you might feel like you don't deserve to have made it through. I sat with that for a moment, really examining my feelings. No, I finally said. I don't feel guilty. I feel proud. I did everything right. I fought for every single day I was out there. Dr. Kim smiled. Good. Hold on to that. But there were other emotions I struggled with. Anger, obviously, oceans of it directed at Grant, but also at myself for not seeing the warning signs. Paranoia that made me check locks multiple times and look over my shoulder constantly. Hypervigilance that left me exhausted by the end of each day. And then there was the strange, complicated grief for my old life. I didn't miss Grant, not even a little. But I missed the version of myself who had believed in love and partnership. I missed the innocence of thinking marriage meant safety. I missed trusting people. That's normal, Dr. Kim assured me. You're mourning the loss of your worldview. It's as legitimate as mourning a person. The media attention didn't help my recovery. Everyone wanted to interview me, to hear the story of the woman who survived a year alone. Publishers offered book deals. Producers wanted to option my life story for movies. Survivors of other traumas reached out, treating me like some kind of inspiration. I turned down most of it. I wasn't ready to commodify my nightmare for public consumption. Maybe someday, but not now. Now, I needed privacy and space to heal. Trevor Winters reached out too, asking to meet. I was hesitant. He'd been part of Grant's schemes, after all, but my attorney, Richard Chin, advised me to hear him out. We met at a coffee shop in Cambridge. Trevor looked older than I remembered, worn down by legal troubles and guilt. He ordered a black coffee with shaking hands. I need you to know something, he said, without preamble. I suspected Grant was planning something with you. I didn't know what, but I saw him researching islands and life insurance policies. I told myself it was none of my business. The confession hung between us. You could have warned me, I said quietly. I know, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. He met my eyes. I was a coward. I was so focused on covering my own ass, on getting out of the business with Grant before it all collapsed, that I ignored signs someone might get hurt. I'm sorry. An apology couldn't undo what had happened, but I appreciated the honesty. Your testimony is going to put him away for a long time. Not long enough, Trevor said bitterly. But it's something. He slid a folder across the table. This is everything I have on the Singapore connection. The FBI already has copies, but I thought you should see it, too. You were right. Grant was laundering money for a larger operation. The people he was working for, they're still out there. A chill ran down my spine. Are they dangerous? Extremely. But you helped the FBI identify them. They're making arrests now. Not just here, but internationally. You didn't just stop Grant. You helped dismantle the whole network. After Trevor left, I sat in that coffee shop for a long time, processing what he'd told me. I'd known intellectually that I was part of something bigger, but hearing it confirmed was different. I'd made a real difference. My survival had meant something beyond personal revenge. The thought gave me a sense of purpose I badly needed. Bethany noticed the change in me after that meeting. You seem lighter, she observed over dinner that night. I think I'm starting to understand why all of this happened, I said. Not that Grant had a good reason. There's no justification for what he did. But I can see how my survival served a larger purpose. Other people are safer now because I made it off that island. Bethany reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're the strongest person I know. I laughed, though my eyes stung with tears. I didn't feel strong out there. Most of the time, I felt terrified and small, and completely overwhelmed. That's what makes it strength, she said. Being terrified, and doing it anyway. As the weeks passed, I slowly began reclaiming pieces of my life. I reconnected with old friends who had mourned my death. I visited my parents' graves. They died in a car accident when I was in college, and I found myself wishing they could see how strong I'd become. I even started looking at apartments, ready to move out of Bethany's guest room and into my own space. But the nightmares persisted. Almost every night, I'd dream I was back on the island. Sometimes Grant would appear, standing on the beach, laughing at me. Sometimes I'd see ships on the horizon that never came closer. Sometimes I'd wake up screaming, convinced I could taste salt water and feel sand beneath me. The nightmares may never completely go away, Dr. Kim warned me gently. Trauma changes the brain, but they should become less frequent and less intense over time. I focused on the things I could control. Physical therapy to address the damage done to my body during my year of survival. Nutritional counseling to help me maintain healthy eating habits after months of scarcity. Meditation and mindfulness practices to manage my anxiety. And I prepared for the trial. Richard Chin met with me weekly, going over my testimony, preparing me for cross-examination, making sure I understood the legal process. Grant's defense attorney would try to paint me as unreliable, traumatized, possibly delusional. We needed to counter that narrative with clear, credible testimony backed by hard evidence. You're going to do great, Richard assured me after one particularly grueling practice session. You're one of the most composed witnesses I've ever worked with. I've had a lot of practice, I said dryly. 3 months after my rescue, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Grant, forwarded through his attorney. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter was short. Grant claimed he still loved me, that everything had been a mistake, that he'd panicked and made terrible decisions. He begged me to drop the charges, to give him another chance, to remember the good times we'd had together. I read it twice, then showed it to Richard. Classic abuser tactic, he said immediately. He's trying to manipulate you emotionally, because he knows the legal case against him is airtight. You don't have to respond. I know, I said. But I want to. Richard advised against it, but I wrote back anyway. My letter was even shorter than Grant's. You taught me that actions matter more than words. Your actions tried to kill me. My actions are going to make sure you never hurt anyone else again. See you in court. I didn't sign it with love or any pleasantries. I just signed my name and sent it off. That night, for the first time since my rescue, I didn't have nightmares. Maybe taking that final bit of control back had given my subconscious permission to rest. But I was alive, and that was something. That was everything. On day 418, after being abandoned, 56 days after being rescued, I received a call from the prosecutor handling Grant's case. "We've found something unexpected during our investigation," she said. "Grant had taken out the life insurance policy on you, yes. But he'd also taken out another policy 6 months earlier, on his previous girlfriend. She died in a suspicious boating accident. Her body was never recovered. We're reopening that investigation," the prosecutor told me. "Based on the pattern of behavior, we think he may have done this before. You may not have been his first victim, but because you survived, you'll be his last." I hung up the phone and walked out onto Bethany's balcony. The Boston skyline stretched before me, familiar and foreign at once. Somewhere in this city, Grant sat in a jail cell, probably still believing he could talk his way out of this, still convinced he was smarter than everyone else. He tried to kill me twice over, once on that island, and once by destroying my sense of self, my independence, my power. He'd wanted to reduce me to nothing. Instead, he'd forged me into something harder than he could ever imagine. I thought about that woman on the beach a year ago, watching her husband sail away, screaming his name until her voice broke. I thought about the rage that had kept her alive through those early, desperate days. I thought about the revenge she planned during long, lonely nights. The revenge had been devastating, yes, and sweet, certainly. But it turned out that the real victory wasn't destroying Grant. It was discovering that I was strong enough to survive anything,